Now, what are we doing today? Today we're going to be talking about narrative tenses. These are tenses you use when talking about the past. Typically, you want to tell a joke, an anecdote, funny story, or you just want to say something about your history, something that occurred, but you want to keep your audience engaged. You want them to be interested. You want to sound like somebody that knows what he's talking about and can take control of the entire conversation. So people will be listening to you. Now, how do you do this? Well, one way, of course, is to be able to use these narrative tenses. Today, we're going to be talking about 3 tenses in particular. They are called the past simple, the past continuous, and the past perfect. Now, of course, as I said, most native speakers don't even know what those tenses are. But we're going to use them intuitively, more naturally, let's say, than you might have in the past. Most Polish people know these tenses, can do the activities, can pass tests, but then when they tell us a story, they're completely boring. Why is that? Because they constantly use the past tense in almost anything. Now, you would like me to give you an example. Well, don't be too upset with me. This is just a primitive example, maybe a bit exaggerated, not 100% how Polish people would speak, but there is a sense among native speakers that Polish people tend to use the past simple all the time when giving stories, and they're not able to give a bit of variety. As a result, what you have is more or less monotonic, robotic speech, where, for example, a person may say, remember it's exaggeration, is that they may say, oh, I went to the park, I saw friends, I talked to them, I went home, I watched TV, I went to bed. Well, that's just a list of activities. There's no atmosphere, there's no engagement. Nobody's going to be really interested in what you have to say. In fact, I want to feel a little bit of suspense. I want to be interested. I want to be a part of the experience. With just the past simple, it's not going to work. Let's get started. Oh my gosh, that reminds me, let's is our magic word for today. What does that mean? Well, we have something special for you here at Infogmina. Infogmina has decided to have a special little competition, a contest for you guys. All you need to do is listen to every lesson this week and you will find a special magic word. Put those magic words together in the order. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, that's 5 magic words. Put them together and you'll get an interesting slogan. Tell us what that slogan is. Send us here at Infogmina the slogan, the phrase, those 5 words, that 5-worded slogan to us here at Infogmina on Friday, and you will have the opportunity to win a fantastic prize. Now the question is, how do I use these tenses? Well, that's not so easy, but I'm going to help you. And we're going to use the analogy of a hamburger. Now think. First and foremost, what's the most important thing in a hamburger? Well, the meat, of course. And that's right. The meat is going to represent a certain tense, the past tense, the past simple tense. Without that meat, you have no hamburger. So the most important action, of course, is going to be in the past simple. Those are actions that you want your audience to remember. Now, of course, this is not the only tense we're going to use, but these are the main action. This is the thing that you really want to be able to allow your audience to understand that this is the most important actions. So this, of course, is where you use the second form, the ed ending. Sometimes you have irregular forms that you need to remember. There is, of course, did and didn't. Did for questions, didn't, of course, for negative statements. Most of you know this grammar. This is nothing new. But this, when telling a story, is something that you should use to focus your energy on the most important actions. If you do not use the past simple, then we have a problem. Because if you don't use the past simple, you really don't have a story. You don't have the facts. You don't have the main action that is so necessary for the listeners to be able to engage themselves with your anecdote, with your joke, with your story. How can we make that hamburger a real hamburger, not just a slice of meat? That's not a hamburger. We need to have something extra. What do you like in your hamburger? For example, perhaps you might want lettuce, you might tomato, maybe you want a little bit of bacon, maybe mayonnaise, maybe mustard. You tell me. That is going to be, let's say, for sake of analogy with this hamburger, is going to be the past continuous. Now the past continuous we all are familiar with, most likely. And that is where we use was, were, plus ing. Now, can I give you an example? Sure I can. The first example, let's think, I was walking in the park, it was raining, and suddenly my mother called, right? It was raining, I was walking in the park, and suddenly my mother called. The most important information, of course, is that my mother called. You want to know why she called. Now, the other information is just background information. That's your tomato, your lettuce, your bacon. That gives it a little bit of flavor. It makes it a little bit more interesting. Again, if you are able to do that, you'll be able to engage your audience, get them involved, be really, really interested, even create a sense of suspense. Now, most teachers will tell you, of course, that the past continuous is a longer action. That is true, and something interrupts that action, the past simple. But you can make it a lot easier if you just think of it as atmosphere, as not necessarily the most important action. Now, of course, there are a lot of complicated rules and grammar that you can apply, but I recommend just experimenting with the language. Try to create an anecdote, a story, a joke of some sort, and try it with other people so that you feel more and more comfortable. Now, what about that third tense you were talking about, Andrew? Well, that's the past perfect, and typically the tense that is least liked, or one of those that is least liked by Polish people when learning the English language. The reason is they don't know how to use it. There's not a Polish equivalent. It's quite complicated. You need to learn the third form. That's right, had plus the third form. So when do we use it, and how does it relate to that hamburger? Well, we're still missing the bun, that is the bread, to our hamburger. And if you're going to deliver a story, an anecdote, a joke to our audience, you really need to have the entire hamburger. Otherwise, it's not a hamburger. Otherwise, it's just not going to be exactly the thing that people are going to listen to. So can we give another example? Sure. Remember, I was talking about it was raining, right? I was walking in the park when my mother called. Now, if I use this tense, the past perfect, I'm going to give a little bit more perspective to the entire story. So I could say, for example, I had not spoken to my mother in 2 weeks. That means I'm using a tense that's about something that happened before the main action. That is that meat of that story, those past simple tenses that we're using in the story. Now, if I said I had not spoken to my mother for 2 weeks, you're giving this story a lot more perspective. You're really going to get your story to be more engaging. The people are going to want to listen to what you're saying. Why hasn't he spoken to his mother? Oh, it was raining. Oh, wow. There's something there that's going to keep me engaged, interested in this story. Now, of course, many Polish people ask me, can I survive without this tense? Absolutely. The most important thing you need to remember are that the two tenses, the past continuous and the past simple, are absolutely necessary for engaging people. Some people, including many Americans like myself, don't use the past perfect as much. You can use it from time to time. Well, when can you use it? When can you not use it? Those are difficult questions that you really need to practice with. I can give you a few hinters, but remember, if you have difficulty with it, if you're at the intermediate level, it's not the most important thing. You should be able to understand that that had plus the third form, for example, I hadn't spoken to my mother for 2 weeks, is an action that happened before the main action, the meat of that story. But there are some ways that you can, well, build building blocks, let's say, so that it feels more and more, let's say, of something natural to you to use the past perfect. For example, if you use I believed, I realized, I thought, I remembered. Typically these words used in the past will be followed by the past perfect. So can you give me an example, Andrew? Well, yeah, of course. I realized I had forgotten my wallet. I realized that something before that period of time, I had forgotten my wallet. I forgot my wallet first. I had forgotten my wallet, and then after that, I realized. Naturally, that makes sense. Unfortunately for Polish people, you don't have these tenses in your language, so it becomes a little bit more complicated. But do remember, if you have difficulties, focus first and foremost on the two tenses, the past simple, but don't only use that because you'll sound robotic, and use, of course, the past continuous to give that atmosphere. And if you really want to try something a little bit more complicated, use that past perfect to give yourself a little bit more history to that story, that anecdote, that joke. So now we've come to the end of the lesson where the teacher has to provide you with an example of his own hamburger. Now, I know it's Monday, you're not interested in grammar, but you are interested in a story or two, aren't you? So let me give you one using these 3 tenses, and you tell me how I do. Now, I had a grandmother. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us, but she was a terrible driver. In fact, she was constantly hitting people, having all sorts of accidents. And this story takes place in the 1970s. Probably 71, 72, 73, she had this huge car. It was a Buick, Pontiac or a Buick. I don't remember exactly because I wasn't around then. But she had this huge car. It was almost a tank. And she was driving out of her driveway. That means from her garage down to the street. And as she was driving, she hit into a Porsche. Now, the driver of the Porsche was angry. He started yelling. And while he was yelling, of course, what was he yelling? A lot of vulgarity. And he was saying something to the effect that, well, you hit my car, you hit my Porsche. And she said, I'm really sorry about your Volkswagen. Now, the man was even angry at the fact that my grandmother could not identify the difference between a Volkswagen and a Porsche. She had never been interested in cars. She had had many accidents, and she had absolutely no knowledge of German cars, American cars. She just knew that a car was a vehicle that could move. And as a result, she insulted this man. And after she had insulted him, he responded by saying, "Lady, this is a Porsche. There's only 3 of them left in the world." And how did she respond? Well, she said, "Oh, well, I guess there's only 2 of them now." So what I have here is a story. I've told you a little bit of the history. Maybe I haven't done a perfect job, but the idea is that, as I said, there is a little bit of the atmosphere. As she was driving, there's an action. She was driving. That's not the most important part. As she was driving out of the driveway, she hit into a car. She crashed into a car, a Porsche. The crash is the most important element of that sentence. Her driving is just the background information. She had had many accidents before. Now, of course, that's additional information about the past, or the 1950s, 1960s, when she was driving. These are just examples of how to engage your audience. Now, you can tell me how well I've done. Is the story interesting? Is it not interesting? But I do think it's a little bit more engaging than the average story, which would use just past simple, past simple, past simple. Of course, I can vary it up a little bit. The sun was shining, my grandmother was listening to the radio, she was backing out of her garage when she hit the Porsche. The man got out of the Porsche, started screaming at her. So again, main action, started screaming, hit the Porsche, got out of the car. She was listening to him. While she was listening, or not listening, she said, "I'm sorry about your Volkswagen." So, said, again, a major part of that story. That's that meat. That's that main action. Then he responded. He said, "It is not a Volkswagen. It is a Porsche." So he said, again, that is the main storyline that we're following. Again, all of the main action should be in the past simple. And so grammar wasn't all that difficult, was it? Here, we were able to make it a little bit easier for you guys, I hope, in that we presented to you a hamburger, a perfect analogy of how you should be able to deliver a story, an anecdote, a joke to friends, to colleagues, to other people when speaking in English. And remember how it works. It's pretty easy. The most important information, that meat to that hamburger, has to be the past simple. And anything additional that brings that atmosphere, that brings us a little bit of suspense to the story, well, that's going to be the past continuous. And the last, of course, is the past perfect. If you really want to experiment with the language, use the past perfect. That is the bun, that is the bread to your hamburger. So remember those things and you will be successful. Just practice more and more and you'll become even more successful in delivering a story, getting people's attention, taking control of the conversation, letting people have an opportunity to hear you in the English language. Now, I have to give you a little bit of homework so that you can prove yourselves as well. And here at Infogmina, luckily they have the opportunity for you guys to practice a little bit with these narrative tenses. So look at the site infogmina.com. There'll be a little bit of homework for you guys there as well. And I look forward to seeing you guys on Tuesday when we talk about phrasal verbs, of course. Bye-bye for now, and see you on Tuesday.
Infogmina.com